It's a pretty nice day today, so I thought I would hang outside today, which is rare to see from me, and I thought I would spend this time to tell you about some of my biggest mistakes while selling reptiles. For those of you that don't know, I've been running Emerald Scales for a couple years now, which is a company that takes in, rehabs, rehomes, sells, and breeds reptiles and amphibians, and we ship them to anywhere in the US. And I have learned a ton while doing this, and I have made way more mistakes than I'm going to mention in this video. But I wanted to talk about the very first ones that come to mind, because I assume that those are most likely some of the biggest, if they just happen to pop into my mind very quickly. And we've got three big ones we're going to go over. So if you're considering selling animals, reptiles, or just anything in general, maybe this will help you out. Number one, this one is very specific to reptiles, and that is the fact that I did not specialize in a select few species when starting out. So our kind of plan when starting Emerald Scales is we would simply take any reptile we can find, any health, any species, any size, any age, any location. We would try and get anywhere, get them from anyone, and work with any type. And for the most part, that was fine, all those variables. But the fact that we took in any species was, I think, one of our shortcomings, because we started this just in it was my friend and I. We started it in both of our bedrooms and our parents' houses, so we had limited space. And with limited space, it can be hard to care for a lot of different species at once because they have a lot of different needs. First of all, size. Some are going to just need super big enclosures, and we physically would not have the space if we tried to keep some really big species. Second, animals that need different temperatures and humidity. It turned out it was pretty hard to get different animals all of their exact necessities in the same room, which is kind of expected. Like, if you have both an axolotl and a ball python, for example, an axolotl is an aquatic amphibian that needs 60-degree water, when a ball python is a terrestrial reptile that needs at least about a 90-degree hot spot. And so if these are close to each other in the room, it's going to be pretty difficult to get them both of their necessities. On top of this, if you're keeping some animals that eat rodents, some that eat insects, some that are herbivores, and just all this stuff, it basically added up to a lot of different stuff we had to buy and a lot of stuff we had to store. Stuff that we didn't necessarily have the storage for because it was just so much, not just the animals, but everything they needed. And also, we needed money for this, and we weren't starting with much money because this was our first new business and we didn't have much capital to work with. We weren't like raising money. Again, we were just two young people starting a project, and so for that reason the expenses added up pretty quickly because of that, because we would just have to buy all these little things constantly. But say we just started with, say, leopard geckos, just chicken geckos, maybe leopard, crested, gargoyle, any other gecko, tokay, I don't know, whatever gecko. If we just had those, we'd only have like two foods needed: insects and some sort of fruit mix for the crested geckos. And it would be way more simple than having to get all these different sizes of things. For example, with snakes, we would take in any snake species, whether it's a ball python or almost any snake species, like say something medium size like a ball python, something smaller like a milk snake, or even bigger snakes like Burmese pythons or whatever. Like, not full-size stuff, but larger things where some of the animals were eating adult mice, others were eating hopper mice, which are even smaller, others were eating jumbo rats, and so we just had to have all these different sizes ordered in, and that also added up quickly. So yeah, like I was saying with the geckos, if we just started with just geckos and we just had a few minimal foods that we were feeding them, it would have been more straightforward, less stressful, and we'd know exactly what we have, and that would have made things a lot easier. Because not only would this have saved money and space, but it would have saved time when it came to organizing all the stuff, organizing the expenses, and making sure we had what we needed. And if we ran out of something and we didn't realize it because we had trouble organizing, we'd have to rush out and find that item, just maybe from a local pet store. Well, not local, but like Petco, which is not exactly cheap because they mark up their prices a lot. And if we had started small and slowly increased the number of species and types of animals that we kept, I think we would have been better off. So I don't regret taking in all these different species because it was really fun and really cool. But if we really wanted to maximize efficiency and the growth financially and just company-wise overall, I think we should have started smaller. And then built up species by species from there as we were comfortable. Because again, we did have to keep up with all the husbandry, all the right hotspots, all the right types of heating and types of lighting. We had to have heat mats and heat bulbs and UVB. And then certain animals had to have certain humidity levels, and it was just all this heating all over the room, and that tended to cause some issues occasionally. Nothing drastic, but it would have been easier had we started smaller. The second one actually ties into the first one in a way, but the first part of the second mistake that we made is trying to have reptile keeping standards for reptiles that were not permanent. So, for example, let's say back to leopard geckos, because they're an easy example. Personally, I like to keep my own permanent leopard geckos in at least 20 gallons for themselves as individuals, and maybe even larger. This is a 30-inch by 12-inch by 12-inch enclosure. It gives them space to explore, and you can just have a lot in here. I also use a non-loose substrate like reptile carpet, which I don't really use now. Now I like using laminate stick-on tiles, and even just paper towel works and stuff, but usually I like to keep it fancier with cooler looking things for my personal pets. Along with this, I have a big variety of items in the enclosure, like some decor, tons of different hides, and all this stuff, and it just looks really nice. And then for heating, each animal will have its own heat mat, its own thermostat to regulate the temperature, and its own lighting even, just so that it looks nice. Even though I don't think leopard geckos really need specific lighting, although I think they should have a day and night cycle, so they know when it's daytime and when it's nighttime. But what we also try to do is keep up these exact standards with animals that would be here temporarily. Animals we had come in that would eventually go out, usually after a few months. And keeping up the exact same standards was both difficult and, in my opinion, unnecessary. If an animal is only going to be with us for a few months, I think it is perfectly okay to decrease the quality of the enclosure. Now, purposely decreasing husbandry sounds weird to say, but it makes sense once you get into it and once you start working on that. So say you get a bunch of leopard geckos in, and you want to adhere to your normal husbandry standards, that being a 20 gallon per gecko. That's a lot of 20 gallons, and we learned this quickly. This is a lot of enclosures lining up, and they literally were just all in a row, lots of individual heat mats, lots of, every single one had its individual thermostat and individual lighting, and even just working with all this was so complicated. The reason this ties into the first thing, how's it tying to the first thing? This ties well into the first thing because not only was it a bunch of leopard geckos with these specific standards, but it was all these different species that we were taking in, and every single one had its own big fancy enclosure. And it was really cool, and it looked really cool, but it really took a hit on our revenue because we had to spend so much more getting every animal exactly what it needed. On top of that, let's go back to the thermostats and heat mats. Electricity is a part of this. I started this in my parents' home, so I didn't really notice the electricity bill because I was not paying for it. But quickly after, I rented a home where we did all of these projects, and I got to see the electric bill and how quickly it rises when every animal has its own thermostat and heating device and all this stuff. And so for that reason, I definitely highly recommend going more compact, more simplified, easier to clean, and more streamlined enclosures, and just husbandry overall. Still making sure the animal gets everything it needs, the right temperature gradient, obviously a water bowl, the food and diet it needs, and making sure there is some sort of lighting in the room, but doing things like getting heat tape, which is a long strip of heating that can go across a bunch of animals. And we started using smaller plastic tubs, big enough so they could still move around and explore a bit, but they were here temporarily, and so enrichment was less vital since it wasn't going to be their whole life that they're going to be in a more boring enclosure, and instead it's just for a few months. So for that reason, I didn't feel sad or bad for the animal for having no decor or less decor, and maybe having a more boring substrate, like using paper towel is way more efficient. You can just pull it out and throw more in, and paper towel decomposes pretty quickly, so it's not too harsh on the environment just because you're throwing something out. And in addition to that, it's also cheaper and way quicker and easier to clean. On top of that, it's way easier to work with small plastic tubs instead of a bunch of big aquariums, for example. Taking one out to clean it is hard, it's heavy, it's delicate, and we cracked a lot of enclosures just trying to work quickly. But the plastic tubs, you can take the animals out and just stack them all and go sanitize them all. Especially when different animals are coming in. Say we had a leopard gecko in a 20 gallon, it sells, and we want to put another one in there. We only sell animals if we're sure that they're healthy and happy, but let's say there was something that somehow slipped through the cracks. We don't want anything spreading from one animal to another, so we completely sanitize every enclosure. And that's hard to do with an aquarium that's big, because it'll take a while and be more difficult. But if you just have small plastic tubs, they're cheaper, so it's not as big of a deal if you just literally throw it away if it's pretty dirty. Obviously this is more wasteful, so if it is cleanable, you can clean it more easily. You can even stick them in the dishwasher, and that gets the majority of stuff, and then you can just wipe it from there. So I'd say you should not be afraid decreasing your standard to a healthy, understandable difference from personal animals. And you shouldn't feel guilty, in my opinion, for putting an animal in something different just temporarily, because they're only going to be there for a shorter amount of time. Now when it comes to breeder animals, for example, say it's an animal for your business, but you're breeding it to produce more animals, I definitely think those should have the peak standards that you can reach, because they are most likely more permanent, or at least going to be there longer. So say you have breeder crested geckos, we still put these in full-size, nice, decorated enclosures because we think they deserve the enrichment and the space, because they'll be here for longer. But if it's just an adult cresty that'll only be here for a number of months while we make sure it's healthy, or get it up to health and weight or whatever, and then sell it, I think it's okay to change those standards. And we just had to get over that. And I wish we had done that sooner. And the third one applies to pretty much anything you're selling, not just animals, but it also certainly applies. But it was one of the big things that I regret, and that's we did not keep detailed enough expenses documented. I use FreshBooks for this. You can also use QuickBooks. More people use QuickBooks, and honestly, if I could pick again, I'd probably go with QuickBooks instead of FreshBooks. But what this is an online accounting software, basically, where you can put in every bit of money that goes in and comes out and changes, and you know where it's all gone. And although we were using this from the start, we just got lazy sometimes and we would slack. And I still do this sometimes, where I just slack on getting those numbers punched in. Also, it wasn't detailed enough, and we weren't putting and considering every single expense. For example, if you own your own vehicle, you can write every single mile off and compare it to your revenue, and it decreases your revenue, which means that you have a lower profit. And this is a good thing because it means that you can pay less in taxes, but it doesn't actually take away from the money you've earned. For example, in North Carolina, I believe it's 55 cents per mile is your reimbursement that you can calculate as an expense. And we simply didn't do this, and we probably missed out on saving a lot in taxes because we traveled a ton. We just should have stayed more on top of this and made it more of a priority. It's super boring, super just uninteresting overall, because you're just punching numbers and trying to figure out all the stuff. But we made this easier by getting separate debit cards for the business and having a separate bank account, which is way better. And so we could just go in, we used Wells Fargo, you could just go into Wells Fargo and see exactly where the money was going, and then keeping track of it all and keeping detailed expenses, saying what it was, where you bought it, and how much it was, and then the date on that. And that's why you could do this in just a Google spreadsheet for free, but I suggest just using any accounting software. It's usually like 10 to 50 bucks a month depending on what you go with. I think I pay like 20 bucks for FreshBooks per month, and QuickBooks is like 30 or something, and again, that's another expense that you can write off. And it's really important to keep track of this, not only for the tax purposes and because you legally have to make sure you're paying the right amount in taxes, at least if you're in the US, I guess, but also because it really gives you an idea of how you're doing and where your money's going. Being able to look back on these expenses really makes a huge difference when it comes to how you can save money, because every dollar you save you can think of as a dollar that you earned towards the company, because it's basically the same thing. Spending a dollar takes away a dollar that you could have earned, and saving in these little areas really helps. And doing this is one of the ways we realized where we need to change what we're doing with the two previous points that I mentioned. So they all tie together. Keep track of your expenses really well to figure out where you are putting too much money, and then you can change that. For example, if you're realizing you're spending way too much on the electricity bill because you have fans cooling off half the room with heating up the other half of the room, that's a lot more electricity. You can save that and then apply that to doing fewer species at a time if you don't have space to spread out, and then that in turn changes your husbandry standards, potentially for certain species. So those are probably the 3 biggest mistakes, and at least the very first ones that come to mind when it comes to me selling pet reptiles online. I've done a couple other videos about this. You can check out my Making Money playlist. And I'll be honest, this morning I was thinking about maybe doing a paid course on what I've done to build emerald scales. Paid courses, a lot of people make fun of them because you can find a paid course for anything, and oftentimes you can find the same info for free, but I think a lot of courses are great and worth the money, and if you have interest in that, just let me know in the comments, and if so, I will try and make the most valuable and most impactful specific course on how to actually build at least the basics and the foundation on how to start building and how to start working on selling pets, because that's a pretty specific thing, and we had a lot of trouble finding information on it. So if you have interest in that, let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll start working on one. And other than that, I'll still definitely do free content like this one, which hopefully was interesting. I know these get way fewer views than normal videos, but I love talking about finances and money and businesses and learning it as I do it, and I like being able to document the process as it goes. So yeah, and you can check out the other links in the description that support me, and they have I have cool stuff there. Products I recommend, some coupon codes that you might need for feeding your animals, for example, and a bunch of other stuff, so you can check it out. It's actually noon right now, and I didn't really sleep, so hopefully this video was coherent. But that'll be it for this video. So I'm Alex, and thanks for watching.